Okay, everybody. I show it as a couple minutes past 1 o'clock, but let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for another 30-minute expert series session. Today, we're going to be covering a new feature that's pretty exciting called B2W production targets. So a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Tom Willey. I'm the Senior Solutions Engineer for B2W Software. So I started at the company about 13 years ago as a product trainer, and then was heading up the implementation team for a while, and then was brought on to be a solutions engineer where I do a lot of product demonstrations. And I'll be doing most of the speaking here. Riding shotgun with me is Mike Morneau. He'll be somewhat of a silent partner. Mike is actually the product manager, so production targets and pretty much everything that you see in B2W schedule is really his brainchild. And he'll be monitoring the questions panel. We'll go over the agenda in a moment, but you see Q&A at the bottom. We do encourage folks to ask questions along the way. So there is a questions panel. And if you have questions as we go through the software, feel free to put those questions in there. If it's something that applies to the larger group, I'll do my best to answer that question in the context of the webinar. If it is kind of a niche question or maybe doesn't apply to the overall group or the concept that we're looking at, Mike might just answer that question directly. But we'll certainly do our best. We'll leave a couple of moments at the end of the session. But again, feel free to ask questions as we go. So for our agenda today, again, we're really going to be focusing on the new feature, production targets. We'll spend a couple of slides just talking about the concept in general, and then really we'll go right into showing you how those production targets work in both B2W track and B2W schedule. And it is kind of important to understand that production targets is really a platform feature, meaning that it's not specific to just a single element. It does cross both B2W track and schedule. So if you're a track customer, you get that feature. If you're a schedule customer, you get that feature. And if you have both elements, you'll see that it's bidirectional. Targets that you create in track are visible in schedule and vice versa. So I'll go ahead and get us going here. So what you see here is this idea of production targets kind of before production targets. In other words, how are we setting production for folks out in the field? And for a lot of our clients, they're essentially using the estimated productivity. So they won a job, they've used our estimating system, and in the estimating program, you essentially have an estimated rate, which is generally like a quantity per day. And that's good for estimating purposes, but it creates kind of unrealistic expectations. Every day is exactly the same. And so if you're using that to target your productivity, once things actually get going, you might find that you're actually quite a bit off. So if I've targeted 100 tons every day, because that's my estimated rate, realistically, I might not be at my top game right out of the gate. I missed productivity by a little bit, and then the next day was a little bit worse, and then I'm finally ramping up. And so I might think that going forward, as I'm hitting those 100 tons a day, that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, but in essence, I'm getting a distorted view of the job because I haven't really hit the productivity day by day that I'm going to need to finish the project on time and under budget. So what production targets allow you to do is create on a daily basis. You can target specific quantities for specific cost codes, or again, what we call tracking accounts. And so it allows you to have a lot more control over what number you're giving for that crew to hit for that day. So I can have much more variation and say, take into account things like, well, on the first day, production will probably be a little bit low. I see we have a bad weather expectation for tomorrow, so I'll set even lower. And then as a result of that, I really need to ramp up production for the rest of the week. And so being able to create those expectations and communicate them to the crews, as you start to record production, you'll get a much better and more accurate sense of where you are according to that plan. So production targets is our ability to do that, to create those quantities, those expectations within the software, and then communicate them to the field. So let's go ahead and jump right into the software. So I'm going to leave the world of PowerPoint here and move over to the operations platform. So for any folks that already have track or schedule, you may have already seen to a certain degree that production targets come into play. And so it is a platform-wide feature, or at least for schedule and track, and it's really implemented starting at the job level. So if you go into the jobs area, of the ops platform, you might see that there's a new tab now called production targets. And if I go into production targets, that would let me look at any of my cost codes. So production targets are set at the cost code level. And I would be able to go in and essentially manage targets. I could look at targets that have been set in the past. I'll be able to see as I create targets how I perform against them. And essentially right here on screen, I can see some of my target history for a given crew. I've given a quantity, and then I'd be able to see what I actually do from the field log and my variance and my production rate and method. So here's a place where I can see that information. I can also begin to create targets. So again, even if I'm only have B2W track, I would have this capability, and I could go in here to manage targets, and that would allow me to create or add targets as well. You would also be able to see over here a kind of visual representation of the reported quantity, how much I have scheduled and how much remains unscheduled. So I'm going to go and add a target. So for a given date job site, I would then be able to set a crew. So I'm going to choose Tom's paving crew here. I would also be able to, if I had B2W schedule, I could set a crew need as well. So I could have a generic type of crew that I then fill later on. And then over here, because I'm already in tracking account 2300, which is paving for the Fox Hill development job, I could now begin to say, well, what is it that I want to target them for? I could target, say, 500 tons per day, and then the system would essentially tell me that that's the production rate. But I could also change that method. So rather than tons per day, I could say, well, I want to put in 500 tons for the day, but I want to see my production rate as something like tons per hour or man hours per ton. And then the system would do that math for me. So if I did tons per production hour, that would be 50. Or rather than targeting a specific quantity, I might say I want to target a production rate. So in this case, that's going to take into account the crew size. And I might say, well, I think we should be able to do 60 tons per hour. And based on a crew size of 3 and the duration of the day, that's going to be 600 tons. So a number of different things that I can do to essentially create that target for the 17th. And then I would save that target. It would now be available out in the field. And I'll show this to you in just a few minutes, but when I say available in the field, that information can now be visible on field logs on the mobile app or on the browser if you're still using the browser version. Now that's useful in and of itself. I can set a single target for a single day, but also notice that I have this distribute capability. So I could, if I wanted to, say, well, I want to set a number of targets over a number of days. So I could say, okay, again, for, let's say, Tom's paving crew, I want to target them for days at rate. And so I would be able to say, well, I'm going to target you for, say, 4 more days, starting on the 18th. And I'm going to give you a target of 600 per day or 500. Maybe I'll make it different just so you can see those values on screen. And then when I hit distribute, it just creates those new targets. So now I have ones for the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. And I would also be able to see on screen the amount that I've scheduled and the amount that remains unscheduled. So that's one of the methods that you can use to create targets. We'll also see how you can create and look at those targets inside of B2W schedule. But now that I've done this, what I'm going to do is show you how that ends up getting into the hands of the crew. So I'm going to move over and bring up my mobile app here. So here I am now inside the mobile app. So users out in the field could use the mobile app to create field logs. And when I go to create a new field log, just as a reminder, if you're a track information from your last field log, or you could make a field log from scratch, if you also had B2W schedule, you could create it from schedule. Okay? Either way, whether you're creating production targets in schedule or track, you would then have that ability to pull them down. So when I do copy from the last field log, I'm going to be able to pull down production accounts, and that's going to include any of those targets if I choose to expose them. So those production targets, they're another piece of information that you can choose to turn on or off. So I'm going to create my field log for today. And just real quick, it looks like we have a quick question here. So can you change the production rate viewed and reported in scheduled quantities? Yes, you can. So you can change the production rate within the production target, and you can view the scheduled quantities. I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I'll tell you what, I'll ask Mike to kind of ask a few more qualifiers there to make sure we understand the question. But yes, you can see and view that information. So Mike, if you would just kind of give a more thorough answer there or fill in the bits and pieces that I'm not aware of there, I'll continue on here in the meantime. So in addition to the field log itself, if I now go to the grid view, you will see that that target of 600 tons is now visible on screen. So you can see the little target symbol there. And so I'm going and filling out my field log. I might say we came pretty close. We did 525 tons. And then so I'll say we spent 10 hours for employees and equipment. Then I might validate that, push that back to the server. When I do that, to turn on more information at the field log level. So for example, and there are some additional fields that you can choose to turn on or off here. So I can see my targeted quantity, and I could also see the target variance, what I entered into the field log. So I was targeted 600, I only did 525. So I'm off by 75 tons, and I achieved 87.5% of the target. So being able to create that at the job level, push it down to the field log itself, the field staff being able to see that target expectation, and then see some basic information about how I performed against that target. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of go back. So once I've pushed that information back into the server, again, it's now visible. So if I go back to that jobs area, not only is that information visible as part of the production targets, but it's also visible as part of the tracking accounts too. So when I go into tracking accounts and go into a specific account like that 2300, I would be able to see both the dashboard, the summary dashboard that gives me some performance indicators, but also those targeted values come into a little bar at the top here. So as I continue to enter more data, I would see the estimated, the total quantity that's been targeted, the total reported quantity, and the target variance, both in terms of sheer number of quantities, but also things like production rate. I can see here that my estimated production rate was 9.6 tons per man hour. I targeted a little bit higher, maybe hoping for the best. And then it looks like I reported about 11.3 tons per man hour. So I missed the boat a little bit, but as is often the case, I maybe did better than the estimate, but not as great as management was hoping to push us towards. So I'm going to continue on here. That information is also available in production targets as well. But if I scroll down here, we'll see activities and adjustments, production target history, and we'd also be able to get a visual representation. So here you can see these are the production targets that I created, and I would actually have the option of looking at different dates and getting some more information over time. So I can see on the 17th, I targeted 600, I did 525. I'll also be able to see my targets for the rest of the week. I'm just going to go back to a slightly different period of time where I have a little bit more field log data. And what I want you to see here is over this period of time, I can see a number of targets. Again, I didn't quite make the targeted quantity every day. I beat it a little bit here and here. But at the top, you can see some trending lines. So it'll actually give you a visual representation of the targeted quantity, which is the purple line, then what I actually achieved, so my reported quantity, and then it will show you both the estimated rate, which is again that flat rate we're kind of looking to manage, and then also be able to see the average rate of production. So, you know, a really good visual representation to look at a glance and see if you're able to match what you had set for yourself. So that's a pretty good overview of the production targets, both from the perspective of creating it at the job level from within Track, and also looking at it through the field logs in the mobile app. What I'm going to do now is kind of shift gears a little bit and look at those production targets from within schedule. So again, it's a platform-wide feature. The feature's available, providing that you're allowed to have it. So there are security features behind it. In fact, for production targets, that is another aspect that you can choose to turn on or off within a given schedule. So for folks that don't have B2W schedule, you can actually create an unlimited number of your own custom views or schedules, and you have a lot of control within each schedule in terms of what data is shown. It could be just employees or equipment or crews, and one of the data points you can choose to turn on or off are these production targets. So you might choose to turn them off, you might choose to turn them on. It's really up to you. But just like you have in the other areas, you have the ability to go and either create a target. And if you create a target, you would be able to set that target for a specific job site. I can also set it for a specific crew. And again, I would be able to set it for a specific account. And then very similar to what you saw inside of B2W Track, I can see the reported, the scheduled, the amount remaining unscheduled. And I would also be able to put in either days at rate or quantity over days. So I could even right here within the schedule say, well, I'm going to set it for these 3 days, and I want you to achieve something like 2,100 tons over those 3 days. So the system would again know that it's 700 per ton, or 700 tons per day. If I then add that to the schedule, they would then show up on the schedule as additional targets. And as you would expect, as you had seen, I created those targets in Track, and they're visible here inside of Schedule. The reverse is true. So I created these schedule targets here. If I went in the job, I would also see those same targets within the job. Because really, it goes against the same job in both directions. Another thing that you could do, again, these are visible on pretty much all the different types of views. So if you wanted to, you could do that from a crew-centric view. You could look at your production targets just in terms of your crews and set them here if you wanted to, create targets. And again, I would see those targets underneath the crew here. So it essentially is part of any view that you choose to make it. And that's really it in a nutshell. The ability to create those targets within jobs, see them on the field log. It looks like there is another question. How would you recommend scheduling a crew that has multiple concurrent production targets on the same day? On a unit price contract, pipe installation may have excavation. Okay, so in your example here, you might have a single pay item that might consist of multiple separate cost codes. And how do you set those as a target? And the answer is you can. So you can actually create multiple targets for the same crew on the same day for different cost codes. You would essentially create them separately, but even for something like Tom's paving crew here, I could actually go in and I could create another target potentially for the same job, where I say, okay, well, in addition to you being sent to the Emerson job site, I'm going to select a different account for you. So you might, just as probably a bad example, but you could be doing both excavation, which is by the cubic yard, and you already have a target for tonnage as well for the paving. But I could then set you an additional target of, say, 300 cubic yards, and I absolutely could add that to the same crew on the same day. And you would actually see that. You'd see there's 2 production targets. And if I just click on the pop-up here, I'd be able to see both of them. 300 cubic yards based on 10 hours at 300 cubic yards a day. And they'd also be able to see the 10 hours at 60 tons per production hour. Oh, another question came in. What version must we be on to have access to production targets? That's a really good question. This was released in version 18.2. So 18.2 is the currently available, the most recent edition that was released. Mike, you correct me here, but what are we here in January? I think did it come out sometime in September, October? So it's been out for a little bit. And we are just on the verge of another release, version 18.3, which will have some other pretty exciting functionality. Another question, how do you adjust for a rainy day? Well, that's kind of the essence of it. If you're looking at a target that you've set for, say, tomorrow, and you now realize it's going to be rainy, you could modify that target and lower it. But in essence, if you set the target for today and then you go out and it's rainy, you achieve what you achieve, and you would simply see that you didn't meet that target. Is it possible to use Primavera P6 files? No, it is not. So there is no integration between B2W operations and P6. They essentially do very different things. Ours is more of being able to schedule and manage the real resources you have, where P6 is more of a project management, more of a theoretical tool. I think those are all the questions I see in the panel right now. If I missed any, then by all means, Mike, let me know. Also, we are making this essentially a monthly series. So for folks that want to, they can certainly sign up for the next one. The next webinar, which will be about this time in February, will be all about the B2W mobile app. So all the different capabilities of the mobile app, and hopefully some tips and tricks for folks that are using the app but might not be using all of its power and capability. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And if there are any additional questions, feel free to send them along. We'll do our best to answer them offline. And hopefully we will see you at the next webinar.